So, a very good evening to all of you.
Next class. Okay.
Good
Um,
evening, sir.
Good evening. So, in the last class,
Good evening.
had an basic introduction about what is a contract,
Evening, sir.
what are the essentials of a valid contract. Now, in this class, we shall continue from where we left. Up till the types of implied authority of an agent, we had covered. So, seven topics were dealt up to in the last class. Now, we shall move to the concept of sub-agency. As you all know, as per our discussion, basic thing is that an agent is a person who does something or who acts on behalf of a principal in order to represent the principal in front of the third parties. So this is a person who is called as agent. Now we so generally, what is the general rule? That once a thing has been delegated to an agent, only that agent can perform that work. Nobody else can perform that work. Only that agent can do. So this is basically the general rule. There is a maxim with regard to that. There is a Latin maxim, delegatus non potest delegere. It means that no delegated powers can be further delegated. See, once the principal has delegated his authority to an agent, that particular agent can only perform the work, or that particular agent can only represent the principal in front of third parties. This is the general rule. But we are here discussing the concept of sub-agent. Sub-agent, as the name suggests, a person who has been appointed by the agent under him. That person is known as sub-agent. So there can be a situation that an agent may sometimes delegate the duty that has been delegated to him by the principal to somebody else. There may be such circumstances, but ordinarily an agent cannot delegate his duty which he is supposed to perform himself as per this maxim. But this concept of sub-agent is an exception to this general rule. Now, when we see the provision section 191 of the Indian Contract Act, it defines this person. It defines the person known as sub-agent. He is a person who is employed by and acting under the control of original agent in the business of agency. Now, let us look into a situation where there is a principal. He wanted to construct he wanted a building to be constructed for him, and for that he had appointed an agent. So, as per the general rule, the agent himself has to construct the building. But what is the normal circumstances? That person hires different individuals. He hires different contractors. He arranges for the supply of materials. He allocates some laborers under him who ultimately work for the principal. So people who are appointed by that agent under him in order to complete the work of the principal, they are known as sub-agent. So sub-agent will act under the control of the original agent, but not under the control of principal directly. Indirectly, the principal is the owner. He is the one for whom the work is being done. But when we talk about sub-agent, his control and his authority will lie into the hands of the agent. Okay? Now, there is another concept which is known as substituted agent. Both of them are related to that person only. Because a person who has been appointed by an agent, he will be a sub-agent to that agent. But for the principal, he'll be a substituted agent. He'll not be a sub-agent because only the agent can appoint sub-agent. But for the principal, he will be known as substituted agent. So the basic difference between sub-agent and substituted agent is very much fundamental. When a person who is in the capacity of agent, he appoints or names another person under him. He is known as sub-agent for him. But the same person is known as a substituted agent for the principal. Two things need to be understood here. One, the authority and control upon that sub-agent or the substituted agent shall lie into the hands of only the agent, not the principal. Principal can indirectly look into the matter, but he cannot give direct orders to the substituted agent or the sub-agent, whatever we call it, whatever we call that person, because both of them are the same persons. Difference is that only the agent can appoint sub-agent, and that sub-agent will be a substituted agent for the principal. I'll give an illustration. A person appoints an auctioneer under him to sell his merchandise. So that person is the principal and the auctioneer is the agent. Now, the agent here in this case, he appoints another person under him to be the actual auctioneer. So the other person who has been appointed, he will be a substituted agent for the principal, not a sub-agent. He will be a sub-agent only to that person who was appointed by the principal. So there are three set of people involved here: principal, agent, and sub-agent. And this sub-agent will also be known as substituted agent. Now, coming to the last topic of the concept of agency, it is termination of agency. Once an agency has been created, it has to come to an end at some time. So what are the situations where an agency must come to an end? The first way in which an agency can be terminated is when the agent's authority is revoked by the principal. When the authority of the agent, whatever authority the agent was having, when the principal himself terminates that authority or revokes that authority or takes back the authority, it is referred to this situation. The principal in this case may expressly cancel the agency. He may say that, okay, now my work has been completed, I terminate the agency. So no more relationship between both of them will exist, and the agency will come to an end. The second way is when the agent himself renounces the business of agency. In the first situation, principal was saying that, yes, my work has been done, so I terminate the agency. But in the second case, agent himself, because of any reason, he himself is renouncing the business of agency. He doesn't want to continue as the agent of the principal. So he can give expression regarding that. He can tell the principal and he can tell the third parties also that no more he is the agent of the principal. Now, these were the voluntary revocations. In the first instance, principal voluntarily revokes. In the second instance, agent voluntarily revokes the agency. Third situation is when the purpose has been completed. When the purpose for which the agency was created, it is concluded or it gets over. So no more there is existence of any agency, because the transaction for which the agency was created, the building has been constructed, so automatically the agency will get terminated and no more principal and agent will have any relation between them. Fourth is when either of the parties, that is the principal or the agent, either they die or they become mentally disabled, because this was the most important requirement. A person must be of sound mind in order to become a principal as well as to become an agent. So when that person gets mentally ill or he gets mentally disabled or he is no more, so in that case the agency will come to an end. And the last way is when the principal himself is adjudicated insolvent, when he is unable to discharge his liabilities, when his assets become less than his liabilities, and he has been declared as insolvent. In that situation also the agency comes to an end. So basically these were the 5 instances when termination of agency can take place. Now after this we move on to, so with this the concept of agency has been discussed, and if any confusion or any doubts you can ask, because after this we'll move on to another concept, another kind of special contract. So should I proceed?
Yes, sir. Yes, you proceed.
Okay,
So,
okay.
so I had a
So
question.
whatever I- I've been discussing, I shall be uploading the essential materials for that. You can refer to them. Okay, whatever I'm discussing here. Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, I wanted if you can just go back and explain once again the difference between sub-agent and the substitute agent, because you said that they are the same, but the
Okay,
slide
okay.
says that one is being hired by the principal and another by the sub-agent, I guess. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, yeah. I'll tell you. The basic thing
Okay,
is that a person who has been appointed under an agent, that person will be known as sub-agent to that agent. For that agent, he will be a sub-agent, but the same person will be a substituted agent for the principal. He can take direct orders from the agent, but not from the principal. Okay. So I think, wait a second. Uh, I've made a mistake in this. The last point is like I've written that sub-agent is appointed by the principal while substituted agent is appointed by the agent. No. This
right.
is not the right thing. This was why you had a confusion.
Yes.
I've okay. So you just understand this, that sub-agent as well as substituted agent, both of them are the same person. For the agent, that person will be known as sub-agent, and for the principal, that same person will be known as substituted agent. Okay.
So what
He
exactly is
has
the
been actually,
difference between two terms?
difference is only with regard to the appointment. The
Okay,
work of both of them is the same because they are both the same persons, but
same
we will
person,
call
right?
him a sub agent. Yeah, we will call him a sub agent to the agent, but we will call the same person as substituted agent because just see, principal had appointed a person, so that
Right.
person has actually substituted another person in that capacity. So for the principal, he becomes a substituted agent.
Got that.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Now we shall be moving on to the next concept, which is the contract of the special contract of indemnity. Indemnity basically means giving a security or protection against any kind of loss to a person. If any person incurs any loss, if another person assures him that yes, in case you suffer any loss, I will be there to compensate you. So that situation, that particular instance is known as giving indemnity. So I shall be first of all I should discuss the lesson plan. First thing which we will discuss is meaning and objective of contract of an indemnity. What exactly it means and what is the objective behind these kinds of contracts. Then who are the parties in a contract of indemnity. Then we will move on to essential elements of contract of indemnity. And then rights of indemnity holder. Indemnity holder is the person who holds the indemnity. And last thing under this topic, we'll discuss the commencement of liability of the indemnifier. There are, as I said, we'll be discussing who are the parties in a contract of indemnity. So we shall be discussing the rights of the indemnity holder as well as when the liability of the indemnifier begins. Moving on. contract of indemnity is a special kind of contract because the objective itself is very much clear from the beginning. The objective here is to compensate a person in case he suffers any loss. So, as per section 124 of the Indian Contract Act, a contract by which one party promises to save the other from loss caused to him by the conduct of the promisor himself or by the conduct of any other person is known as a contract of indemnity. So, as I said, the objective under this contract is very much clear. The objective is to indemnify the person to whom the promise has been made, to compensate the other person to whom the promise has been made, or to save that person from any loss which may happen to him by conduct of the promisor, that is, by conduct of the person who has promised him, or by conduct of any other person. So, I hope this is clear. The objective of this contract is to save the party who has been promised, and the loss which this party will suffer may take place because of the conduct of promisor as well as because of the conduct of any other person. So under this contract, he will be indemnified. He will be compensated by the promisor. Once we discuss the parties, who are the parties, it will be more clear. So I move on to the parties in a contract of indemnity. As I said in the last class, in order to form a contract, there has to be offer from one side. So the person who gives the offer is the promisor. He is promising that I will do these and these things for you. So when we talk about contract of indemnity, what the person is promising? The person is promising that yes, in case you suffer any loss, I will be there to compensate you. So he is the promisor. And in the contract of indemnity, he will be known as indemnifier because he is giving indemnity. He is indemnifying the other person. So he will be known as indemnifier. Now, the person to whom the promise has been made, he will be known as indemnified or indemnity holder because he is being indemnified or he is holding the indemnity from the side of the promisor, who is known as indemnifier. Therefore, the promisor in this case is known as the indemnifier, and he is the person who promises to bear the loss. And this loss may be caused due to the conduct of promisor himself or any other person. Even if any other person does anything, the promisor is having the duty to compensate him, to make good the loss which the promisee has suffered. Now, the promisee or the indemnified or the indemnity holder is that person whose loss is covered or who are compensated. So basically, two parties are there. I hope the parties are clear under this contract of indemnity. Now coming back to the meaning. Now when we read the section, a contract by which one of the party promises to save the other. So first party here is the indemnifier. He is promising that in case the indemnified, who is the second party, in case he suffers any loss because of his conduct or the conduct of any other person, he will compensate the loss which has been caused to him. So this is what is contract of indemnity. Any contract which has this kind of nature will be known as contract of indemnity. I'll give a basic example. If I promise you that, okay, if you secure less marks, I will be guiding you. I will arrange for special lectures for you. So what I'm doing here, if you are suffering any loss because of my conduct or because of any other's conduct, so I am promising that I will save you. This was a basic example. Do not think it very much with relation to business, but just for understanding, I was explaining this, that if I promise that I will save you from any loss which you incur, so I will be the indemnifier and you will be the indemnified. And if this concept is applied to business transactions, it will be known as contract of indemnity. So basically, the meaning of indemnity is to secure or protect a person against a loss or to compensate that person. Okay. Now, moving on to the objective of contract of indemnity, as I said, the objective of entering into a contract of indemnity is to protect the promisee against unanticipated loss. So, if the promisee in this case, who is the indemnified, if he incurs any loss or any unanticipated loss, so the promisor will be there to protect that person, to compensate him. Protection of the promisee against unanticipated losses caused to him due to conduct of the promisee or any other person. Now moving on, what are the essential elements? What are the basic things which need to be present in a contract of indemnity? Since it is a contract, all the essentials of a valid contract will be there. So the fourth essential is very much clear, that there must be offer and acceptance, consideration, lawful object, all these things must be there. Apart from this, there are three things. First is the parties to a contract. The parties in this kind of contract can only be either the indemnifier or the indemnified. Nobody else can be the party in these kinds of contracts. So, as I said, indemnifier is the person who is the promisor, and indemnified or indemnity holder is the person who is the promisee. Indemnifier is promising to the promisee that yes, if you incur any loss, I will be there to make good that loss. Next is protection of loss. As I said, the basic objective of contract of indemnity is to protect the loss which has been caused to the indemnified. So a contract of indemnity is entered into for the purpose of protecting the indemnified from the loss, and this loss may be caused either because of the conduct of the promisor or any other person. And third is that this contract of indemnity can be expressed or it can be implied as well. As basically the contract can also be an expressed contract or implied contract. Similarly, a contract of indemnity can also be expressed or implied. And as I discussed in the last class, express contract or express contract of indemnity, it means that it is somewhere written or somewhere spoken between the parties. And implied contract refers to such contracts in which there is no specific or expressed feelings of the parties, but still because of the conduct of the parties, it is very much implied. So it can both be expressed as well as implied. It can be related to a situation. If there is a mutual understanding between the parties, the contract can be implied as well. But if the parties are unknown to each other, so there must be an express contract. Then only the parties will have faith upon each other. Otherwise, they may not have faith. If there are two brothers, there can be implied contract between them because they know each other. They are brothers. They are having that relation. But if two strangers are there, they must enter into an express contract. Then only the objective will be fulfilled. So it can be both ways. It can be expressed as well as it can be implied. Now, coming to the rights of the indemnified. I hope who is an indemnified is very much clear. He is that person who has been given indemnity, who has been promised by the other person that I will save you, I will compensate you. So the first right which the indemnity holder is having is the right to recover damages paid in a suit. I'll discuss a situation. If a person has been promised by another person to be indemnified related to a specific business transaction. So while dealing with that business transaction, if he has to go to the court and he has to uh, file a suit, he has all the right to recover the damages which he may pay in that suit. Damages here means the compensation. If he had to pay another person some amount in that suit, he can demand it from the promisor he can demand it from the indemnifier. So he has all the right to recover damages which he has been compelled to pay in the suit. Therefore, an indemnity holder has the right to recover from the indemnifier all the damages which he may be compelled to pay in any suit in respect of any matter to which the contract of indemnity applies. But it is very much clear with this that if the suit is related to that particular clause of indemnity, then only he has the right to recover it from the indemnifier. Other than that, he cannot recover anything. Any matter to which the contract of indemnity applies, only with regard to that matter, he can recover damages. So basically, damages is a legal term. Damages basically means any harm. But when we talk in a legal sense, damages here means the amount which he has to pay, or whatever amount he has to make compensation to another person. Now, next is the right to recover costs incurred in defending a suit. It is also similar to the first right. In the first right, we discussed that whatever amount he has to pay to another person, he can recover that. In the second right, we are discussing that he can recover all the costs, all the expenses which he may have incurred in order to file the case or in order to proceed with the case. So it is known as costs. It may be the court fees, it may be the fees of the advocate, everything is included, but only with the matter which is the subject matter of contract of indemnity, with regard to only that. So he can recover all the expenses which he had incurred while defending his suit, while fighting the suit, while fighting the case. And third right is the right to recover all the sums paid under compromise. If the case is decided by means of compromise, and when we talk about compromise, it means that the parties are settling the dispute within themselves out of the court. So it is known as out of the court settlement. If the parties if the parties arrive at out of the court settlement and any compromise amount has to be paid by the parties, by any of the parties, so that particular amount can also be recovered from the person who had promised, that is from the indemnifier. So the rights are related to recovering whatever things he can recover from the indemnifier. The indemnified will have all the rights through which he can recover his loss from the indemnifier. Basically, he is holding the indemnity, so he has all the right to recover all the expenses. Now, next, the very much important part of this contract of indemnity. Commencement of liability of the indemnifier. From when the liability of the indemnifier will begin. When we look into the provisions of the Indian Contract Act, it does not provide the time of commencement of indemnifier's liability. But what has happened, because of judicial decisions, different high courts in India have held certain rules in this regard. There is no provision deals with the time of commission of liability of the indemnifier, but it has been judicially interpreted. As I said, since the object of the contract of indemnity is to compensate the loss once the indemnified suffers that loss, so until and unless the indemnified has suffered any loss, he cannot claim compensation nor he can recover anything from the indemnifier. So the first rule which has been laid down is that the indemnifier is not liable until the indemnified has suffered the loss. So suffering of the loss should be the first thing which should take place. In case there has not been any loss to the indemnified, he cannot claim from the indemnifier. So this means the indemnifier is not yet liable to indemnify the person. He is only liable when there is any loss caused to the indemnified. This was the first rule. And the second rule is that indemnified can compel the indemnifier to make good his loss, although he has not discharged his liability. So there can be two situations. Once the loss takes place, the indemnifier himself comes to the indemnified and compensate him. The other situation can be he may have suffered loss and now he is applying to the indemnifier to make good his loss. So the liability commences when it is not that if he himself does not come to the indemnified, he will not have the liability. He will have the liability. And in this case, when the indemnified comes to the indemnifier, the liability, the commencement of liability shall begin. So basically, with regard to this, there is no provision under Indian Contract Act, but it has been held through the judicial interpretations. So I hope the basic meaning of contract of indemnity is very much clear. The objective, the parties, what are the rights which the indemnified is having, when the liability commences, when the liability of the indemnifier commences, any confusion or anything which you want to ask up till now, you may ask.
So I had a question. You said that it could be either expressed or
Okay,
implied.
okay,
So
yeah,
if it is
yeah,
implied, this means that it's not written anywhere. There's no written right. Implied. Sorry. So
right.
in that case, is it a possibility that the indemnifier, the first party who has promised, they back out and they do not want to pay? So how would that particular case
That
works
is the
out? Because there's nothing
okay,
written.
okay. I'll tell you. As I said, it has to be made sure between the parties what kind of relationship they are having. When we talk about expressed contracts, it is very much clear that the parties want that there should be a thing in writing because they have the fear of like they may have the fear that a party can back out. So in that
Right.
case they enter into an express contract, but there is a
Hmm.
possibility that relationship between the parties are such that they believe themselves. So
Okay.
the law has opened this window. There can be implied contracts as well because implied contracts are very much like they don't take much time. When we talk about expressed contracts, we must go to the court, we must sign on the documents, on the papers. There are so much of formalities. So if when we talk about the relationship between parties, if the relationship is such that they believe each other, so they may avoid this time, they may avoid this long time. Okay, so this is why the provision has been provided,
Okay.
and it is very much it is not that every time there can be implied contract. It only depends between the depends on the relationship
The
between the
relationship
parties.
between the two. Right.
Then only implied contracts will be applicable. Okay, it depends on case to case
Okay.
basis actually. Yeah.
Right.
If relationship is
Thank
such
you.
that they trust each other, so they may go for any kind of contract, either express or implied. Okay. So now we move on to, I'll give a basic introduction of this another kind of special contract, which is known as contract of guarantee. Guarantee, basically, the dictionary definition of guarantee is the assurance that a legal contract will be duly enforced. When we talk about guarantee with regard to law, it means that there is an assurance from either of the sides that the legal contract will be duly enforced. This means that neither of the party shall back out. Okay, so a contract of guarantee means a contract to perform the promises made or discharge the liabilities of a third person in case of his failure to discharge such liabilities. I'll give an illustration, then it will be very much clear. There are three parties, A, B, and C. A enters into contract with B for selling some goods. Okay, now this is another contract. A and B are having a separate contract with regard to sale of goods. Now, if they three of them enter into a contract of guarantee, it implies that the person C will make sure that A and B duly complete their contract, duly perform their respective promises. So here C will be known as surety because he is assuring or he is giving the guarantee. Okay, so if A and B had that contract and there was any default in that contract, some issues related to payment. So C will be the person who will, in this case, compensate the party who was supposed to receive the payment. He will make sure that the party does not fail to discharge his liability or perform his promise. So when we understand who are the parties, it will be more clear. First party is the surety. Surety, as the name suggests, he assures or he gives the guarantee that yes, the contract will be duly performed, duly fulfilled. Principal debtor is the person who has to do something for the creditor, and creditor is that person to whom the work has to be done. So, as in that example, A and B, A was the principal debtor, B was the creditor. Principal debtor had to perform something for the creditor, which there can be two situations. Either he can perform that or he can fail to perform. So if he performs, there is no requirement of the surety. But if he fails to perform, the surety will have the liability to compensate the creditor. There are three sets of contracts. First is between the basic contract between the principal debtor and the creditor. The second is between the creditor and the surety, and the third is between the surety and the principal debtor. If the principal debtor fails to perform his respective promise, for example, principal debtor had to give 1,000 rupees to the creditor, which he failed. So in case of his failure, surety will be the person who compensates the creditor by giving 1,000 rupees. Now, further, he may recover the amount from the principal debtor. The surety may recover the amount from the principal debtor because of this contract of guarantee. There are three sets of things involved in this contract of indemnity. First is that the primary liability should be of the principal debtor to
उत्कर्ष सर उत्कर्ष सर
हाँ मैम
आइए हाँ, बंद हो गया बीच में
स्टॉप हो गया ना
स्टार्ट
यस मैम आई एम देयर मैम So as I was discussing, we were discussing the different parties which are there in a contract of guarantee. After understanding the parties, we'll again move back to the meaning of contract of guarantee. So when we talk about surety, he is that person who gives the guarantee that in case the principal debtor fails to perform his respective promise, I will be there to do that particular act. So creditor has the things to be fulfilled. Creditor has been promised. So he may take the promise from the side of principal debtor, and he may also take that promise from the side of surety. It depends on whether the principal debtor performs or he fails to perform. In case the principal debtor performs, there is no question of surety. He will not come into the picture. But if he fails to perform his promise, surety will again come into picture and he will do whatever things are required to be done for the creditor. Now, again, moving back, let's again understand the definition of contract of guarantee. It is a contract to perform the promises made or discharge the liabilities of the third person in case of his failure to discharge such liability. So here the third person is the creditor. Okay, so for the third person, the surety here is performing what was required to be done by the principal debtor. So what is very much clear that the primary responsibility lies upon the principal debtor, and upon his failure, then only the surety will do the needful. Okay, so any confusion with regard to meaning and parties in a contract of guarantee? So these kinds of contracts of guarantee, are mostly required in cases when a party requires a loan, he requires certain goods or some kind of employment. The guarantor in such contracts assure the creditor that the person in need may be trusted, and in case of his default, he shall undertake the responsibility to pay. Therefore, we can say that contract of guarantee is an invincible security which has been given to the creditor. It is a kind of security which has been given to the creditor, that yes, I am there, I will assure that you do not suffer any kind of loss, and if you suffer any kind of loss because of the default of the principal debtor, I will make sure that you get your things done. Okay, so now when we move ahead, we talk about the surety's liability. As per section 128 of the Indian Contract Act, the liability of the surety is coextensive with that of principal debtors unless the contract provides. So this means that the liability is coextensive. The liability exists, but it exists coextensively. It's not that only the principal debtor is liable. The surety is also liable, but his liability commences at the time the principal debtor makes any default. Okay. Therefore, it can be seen that the primary liability to make payment or perform the promise of the principal debtor lies into the hands of principal debtor. Surety's liability is very much secondary. Secondary here means having primary liability means he is the one, the principal debtor is the one who will at the first instance perform his promise or make the payment, and in case he fails, then only the surety will come into picture and his liability will commence. So this was basically what I wanted to deal in this class regarding contract of guarantee. Any confusion? So you may ask. The other things related to contract of guarantee will be discussed in subsequent classes. So till now, any confusion? Anything which you may ask?
No question,
Hello.
sir.
Okay. Okay. So we will move ahead in the next class with regard to this contract of guarantee and all the
Sure,
other
sir.
things which we need to cover. Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Bye.
Okay, bye bye. Romna ma'am.
Yes, sir.
Okay ma'am, I'm done with the class.
Yes, sir.
Conclude हो गया है.
कि- अभी
ठीक है.
तक चालू
Thank you so much. Thank you students.
Okay, good night, students. I think no
Okay.
other
Good
class is
night.
there.
Good night.
I think no other class, na?